fight is that as we age and as, things can change, you might want to consider retiring, you might want more time with children, you might want just more time for yourself. Sometimes my eyesight started failing me a few years back, and as a lash artist, that's really tough. So those are types of things that you have to think about going forward. How you can make it so that you don't have to have your own physical presence be required for every dollar that you need to make. And sometimes as professionals, we get to that point in our career where we're starting to put people on a cancellation list, we have overflow of clientele, and we're thinking, all right, maybe this is a time where I could hire my first staff member to try to help me with some of the overflow of my clients and start to build what could be a little empire. I know when I started, I was just doing lash extensions, and I knew that I was good at that. I had a great client base I was able to maintain, and I thought, if I could even just maintain what I had, I thought I could do it. If I tried to have a storefront and I had even maybe one person helping me, it would be even better. I now have 18 staff. We've been in business for 11 years. We have expanded into a larger location over the years, and so growing my team has been a wild ride. There are a lot of different challenges that come up when you're dealing with staff and with employees. But the hiring process in general and trying to kind of figure out what you want to do before you even take the first step is pretty important, because a lot of times you get a little ahead of yourself and you think, okay, I'm just gonna start with some 1099 independent contractors, I'm gonna keep my prices like this, and then as you start to grow and realize, okay, those weren't the right decisions, and you try to then go back and change your business model or your commission structure with the existing people that you have, sometimes that can not work out the best. So your first hire, what every spa owner needs to know. The first subject is probably the hottest one of all. If you are in any networking forums, if you've been exploring business at all, this is probably one of the bigger hot button discussions. There are a lot of people who get kind of very wired about this particular one because if you do want to have employees, you would want them to be W-2 employees. 1099 would be considered a miscategorization for most instances. You can have people that are independent that are working for you, and a lot of times people do consider themselves a business owner when they have booth renters, even though the role of a booth renting business owner is more of a landlord than an owner of a salon per se, because you don't have a lot of control over the culture. You don't have a lot of control over anything when you have booth renters, because they are all independent business owners as well. A 1099 independent contractor is also their own business owner as well. The reason why it is a little bit of a gray area in this, when we think of hiring people as 1099s into our spa business, a 1099 independent contractor is really somebody who's offering a complimentary service to what your normal offerings would be. So if you are a lash studio and you have people that are working as 1099 for you as lash artists, they're providing your main service. So that's not a complement to your business. If you had a lash studio and you wanted to have an independent nurse come in and offer Botox on a monthly basis, and they have their own business, their own insurance, things like that, that would be a 1099, and that would be an independent contractor that you could have within your business. But if you're trying to categorize your staff, your employees as a 1099, really they would be independents. And the reason that that can be a problem and how that comes to bite you in the butt usually is if somebody is working for you. I think COVID actually was probably one of the biggest eye-openers for a lot of people that were doing 1099, because their staff got into a real bad position when all of a sudden it was like, it's okay, everybody just go home and file for unemployment. Well, people who were hired as 1099 and not realizing that they weren't actually staff weren't eligible for unemployment. They weren't eligible for the state benefits that they should be entitled to, like paid time off. In the state of Massachusetts, for every 30 hours that you work, you're entitled to 1 hour of paid sick leave. And that's something that your employer needs to keep track of. That's something that you need to pay out to them. And those are benefits of being an employee in the state of Massachusetts. So you can get into a tangle if that staff member, for some reason, was no longer working for you, went to go file for unemployment, realized that they were miscategorized. These things can come back. There was an example of a salon who did something similar to this. One stylist did decide to file for unemployment. The state took one look and said, you controlled their schedule, provided all of their tools, you required them to attend staff meetings. They were not independent contractors. They were W-2 employees. And the result was that business owner got hit with thousands of dollars in back taxes, fines, and penalties because they tried to save money on their payroll. But here's the takeaway, it's preventable with a little bit of knowledge up front. So that is kind of, I think, the main appeal when people do select 1099 is that they really are getting away with tax evasion. They're avoiding the payroll taxes that are part of what it takes to be able to properly compensate somebody. So another detriment to that is if you establish your business out of the gate with 1099 independent contractors and then you decide that you want to make your business legitimate by bringing them into W-2, what you're going to face is a really large expense that's now going to come out of nowhere that's going to really topple what we are already struggling with in small margins in our salons by having to then pay that payroll tax. That really does add up. It can be a decent expense, so it's better to just have that be part of how you've already established your business plan. You can have booth renters, you can have independent people that are working for you if you choose to design your business that way. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that if you do have a plan of trying to, retire on the beach and you want a business that runs itself and makes you money and all that great stuff. When you are doing a booth renting salon, a lot of times you as the independent, you're the one who's had this great reputation, you have the amazing client base, you are the one who kind of establishes the business, you pay for everything, you get all the chairs, you keep the whole place, you want this culture, you want people to use your products and sell this retail, and then all of a sudden you realize that really what you've created is just an environment for a bunch of other business professionals to kind of work cohesively together, which can be really nice, and I think culturally there are places that make this model work really well for them, but a lot of the times what it means is the owner is that you're really just keeping what it is that you make. So your physical presence is still required to make the income. All the rest of your renters are kind of paying your overhead and making your bills less expensive per se, but you're still there behind the chair, unless you, of course, were to hire a staff member to try to take over your clients, and then you can be back in this situation of trying to hire a staff. So there are some final choices that you do want to make before you hire that first employee, and that's going to be, do you want that booth rental model? Because the booth renting can be a little bit easier, a little bit more of a hands-off approach. You don't have as much management because these are independent people, they are managing themselves. One of the things that I do see a lot that people do that can kind of create some gray area legally is when people do begin providing a lot of things for their booth renters, like Akbar, providing other amenities and things like that their girls might take advantage of. That does create a little bit of gray area in the separation legally of the fact that they are independents. The analogy I like to use with that is that if you were a landlord and you were trying to rent an apartment to somebody and you just randomly show up and you're like, here, I'm gonna stock your fridge for you and do your laundry. It's very nice, but absolutely not necessary. So action steps before hiring, you want to decide on a W-2 or 1099 before hiring. It is harder to change that later on. If you are hiring a W-2, you want to register for payroll taxes, set up an employee identification number, have your employees fill out their I-9 forms and get workers' compensation insurance and handle your payroll properly. If you're hiring 1099 contractors, you can create a contract, outline their role and their pay, and make sure it's clear that they're independent, and you want to consult lawyers for any contracts that you're going to design. The I-9 forms are getting even more important. I am a spa owner with just a bunch of local girls that work for me. I would have never thought that ICE was coming for me, but ICE came for me recently. I had a 19-year-old girl who was working on my front desk who had had her identity stolen by a woman in California. And her social security number was not her own. And so I was informed that I was illegally employing a woman who did not have a social security number. And so they come and they want to see your forms and they want to, make sure that you actually got their identification, their different forms of identification to prove that they are a U.S. citizen. There are some stipulations with those I-9 forms too. It's some of these laws, you read them and you're like, wow, okay. But you have to have those I-9 forms in a separate locked file box, away from all of your other employee files, and they need to be able to be grabbed at a moment's notice if those people come and on it. So interviewing, so the next step after you decide if you are going to do rentals or if you're going to do W-2s is going to be interviewing your staff. And so interviewing can be interesting. I think a lot of times we're just sort of talking about, okay, what would be a question that we could ask that would really be able to get the good response that I want? But we also have to think about some of the overreaching laws that we can get tangled up in. And a lot of times, they call it the casual conversation trap that can happen in an interview, where really easily you get into casual conversation, somebody's exchanging topics. Oh, I have a baby, and then maybe you say something like, oh, well, if you have a baby, are you going to be able to, be reliable with your time or something? And making certain implications about, if it's something that has to do with their child, or, if you see, I noticed that you play soccer, do you have any injuries that I should know about? Anything that's going to be able to prevent you from doing the duties of the job is a question that you could ask, but you really don't want to be directly, pointing out that somebody has a ring and saying like, oh, are you going to be getting married soon? To be taking time off for that? So just being careful about how you speak. I do think that there's a lot of times that we'll tend to use the term like, we're looking for somebody who's a good fit. And that can be a little bit discriminatory as well, because what does that even mean? So just being very clear when you are interviewing, it's actually pretty important to be clear even in the job postings that you have as well, to make sure that you're not using any language that could be considered discriminatory. Things like, do you have kids? Are you planning to have kids? Family status is protected under the Anti-Discrimination Act, so you can ask things like, are you available to work the required schedule? Where are you from? Is English your first language? National origin is discrimination, so you would just say, are you legally authorized to work in the US? You mentioned a long commute, you have reliable child care, this position requires punctuality, will you be able to maintain consistent attendance? So just rephrasing, if the question isn't directly related to the job, then you should probably just leave it out. The EPA is the Equal Pay Act. That ensures equal pay for comparable work regardless of gender. I want to say that we are all going to exemplify this as mostly women-based industries, making sure that our girls are well compensated. ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. It protects employees with disabilities from discrimination, requires reasonable accommodations unless they cause undue hardship, and the disability can be physical or mental. And this one is a little bit tricky because disabilities do not actually have to be disclosed. They don't have to be disclosed in the interview process, so you might get all the way through the hiring process and training process before you realize that the person that you've hired does have a disability. And if they mention that at any time, that is disclosure. And when they do mention that at that time, you do need to be sure that you can be able to provide reasonable accommodations for them. Now, reasonable and unreasonable is like a little bit gray. Let's say you have somebody who has a mobility issue and they're telling you that you need to put an elevator in your historic downtown building. That is an unreasonable accommodation. If you have somebody who has maybe severe ADHD and they need a more quiet workspace in order to be productive, that is a reasonable accommodation. If you have somebody who has suffered an injury or is having a difficult time standing and you can offer them to be able to sit for part of the time that they're working, that would be a reasonable accommodation. So these are things that you do need to consider and make sure that you can have available. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is the one that enforces the anti-discrimination laws in hiring, employment, and workplace practices. So there are a lot of different subtleties in the way of discrimination. And so it is a little bit of a minefield. You just have to navigate as delicately as possible. I think that there's been a lot that's come to light in recent years, helping us to really navigate conversation, etiquette, the way in which we speak with people, being cautious and conscious of even gender issues and things like that. So I do think that we are, as a people, really learning more positive ways of speaking and trying to avoid discrimination. So these are all just really good things in general to be reminded of. But the I-9 is not the only form in the onboarding circus. There's also the W-4s, state tax forms, direct deposit forms, an employee handbook acknowledgement. You have one of those, right? And here's what you need to know and where to get these forms, because that was a big thing I do remember in the beginning as a business owner. You're kind of like, it's like 1,000 forms, but where do you even get them in? Are the ones that I have current updated? Like, do I need to get a new one now? Or the direct deposit, I also do strongly recommend. That can really help you to avoid a lot of different challenges in employee wage claims and things like that. So the I-9 and W-4 form, you get straight from the USCIS and IRS website. You always want to go there because they're going to give you the latest version. The direct deposit authorization, that's a form that you get from your payroll provider or your bank. The state tax withholding forms, you can check your State Department of Revenue's website. And the employee handbook acknowledgement, you just want a simple document that will confirm that they have read and received and at least pretend to understand your company policies. And those handbooks, I do have some contacts if anybody is interested in lawyers that can help you with creating those. I can say that having a handbook that is not properly written or legally written can be worse than having no handbook at all. And in fact, having no handbook at all is much better than having a handbook that you are not sure is properly or legally written. So keep that in mind. How to help employees fill out the forms? So having employees on the direct deposit, like I said, strongly encouraged. Because if an employee refuses to pick up their last paycheck, they could claim unpaid wages in a lawsuit. I don't know anyone that's happened to. Sometimes treble damages, triple the amount that is owed. With direct deposit, you can prove that they got paid, avoiding that nightmare. So the W-4 confusion, employees are always going to ask you. Usually, I hire a lot of young girls, so there are people who sometimes haven't filled these forms out before, and they really don't know what they're supposed to say. So should I file 1? Should I file 0? The safe answer is that you cannot tell them, but you can direct them to the IRS withholding estimator or their accountant for them to be able to direct them what is the appropriate. Want to choose emergency contacts. You do want to have them. You don't want to let them skip that. The direct deposit setup, you're going to need the voided check, the official bank document to prevent the typos that are going to send their paycheck to someone's vacation fund, and the handbook acknowledgement signature. So best practices for payroll and wage compliance. You want to track all of your employees' hours that are worked. I have girls that work on commission, and so we like to say, if you're working on commission, it's tough to say, like, okay, you've got to be here at 9, and then you're going to work all the way till 5, but you've got these huge gaps in your day, or you don't even start your day until 10 a.m. So we do allow our girls to, if they don't have a client at 9 a.m., if their client starts at 10, they can come in before their first client. If they don't have a client at the end of the day, they're welcome to leave. However, we want to track their hours because I do want my girls to be able to get those government benefits that they're entitled to. So if they're working 30 hours, they're entitled to that hour of sick time. Now, I do have a software system that will allow me to go back in and see how many hours somebody was booked on the schedule, how many hours they were productive, but that isn't going to be the total hours that they were actually there, because they could have on one day sat around for those 2 hours in between their client, and they could have gotten credit for those 2 hours if they had clocked in. So we do try to encourage our staff, even though they are commission-based staff and they really don't need to be clocking in or out, if they do, they are going to get more in the way of that sick time. It is just nice to have them do that. It's good for you to be able to keep track of the hours that your client, that your staff are working as well on average. Making sure that the commission meets the minimum wage. Now, this is something that can happen when you have new staff. If you have somebody who's just started and they're coming in and maybe you are asking that they stay there for most of the day because you want them to introduce themselves to new clients that come in, you want them to have an opportunity for retail or a walk-in, maybe somebody's gonna call last minute. So if you are not able to meet minimum wage through their commissions for that day, you do need to pay them an hourly minimum wage to make up for it. So you cannot have people working for you that are not being compensated. It doesn't matter if they're there for training, it doesn't matter what they're doing, they have to be compensated at least minimum wage. So a lot of the times that's why a commission is so great, because you're making great money. And a lot of the times it works out that somebody's gonna be making more on their commission, even with a few clients than they would have with an hourly rate. But that is something that you do need to make sure of. It's something that you need to calculate. And just be aware of if you do realize that you're asking that staff member to come in a lot to train or talk about products with the clients or introduce yourself to clients, that's still their paid time. There is a little bit of gray area in the training elements with our industry specifically, because some of the things that we train in provide our staff certifications. If you're doing a training for somebody that they would have had to pay for, and you're providing it for free, and they're gonna get a certificate that they could take and go work somewhere else and make a whole career out of. Even something as simple as when we teach our girls how to do spray tan, you could buy a spray tan machine, go take that spray tan certificate, and go start a whole business just being a spray tan artist. So that is a benefit to their career. That is a way that's building their career. That is something that they would have normally had to pay for. In a case like that, there is some gray area there, but that might be something that you could talk to your staff member about, trying to see the value in the fact that you are providing something for free to them, and instead of asking them to pay for this education. However, if you have, let's say, one of the other things that we do a lot is we'll have our reps come in. We want our reps to come in because we want them to talk to our girls about the products, get them excited. Every time a rep comes in and gets you excited about products and you're touching and smelling, the increase in retail sales is really apparent, and you get to have that benefit as a business owner that the girls get excited, they are learning something new, they're touching and smelling new products, and then they sell more products for you, and it's a win-win, right? And that is valuable education for them. However, most of the time you're asking them to come in either before their shift, stay after their shift, not take clients because you're doing it in the middle of their shift. And so things like that they do need to be compensated for. I do a lot of team building events. I invite my staff off campus to go have fun and parties and things like that. If it's during a time where they would have been on the schedule making money, I will compensate them for that. Even though they're coming to a fun party and even though there's all that, I'm asking them to not work that night though, and I'm asking them to not make money. So those are things that, as business owners, sometimes you can make choices, and sometimes it's by law you have to. But I think that the compensation elements are so important in our industry, especially now when we have so many people who see the opportunity to go independent and want to take that you as a business owner want to provide a place that just feels like, why would I ever? Why would I ever? Because there's a lot to being a business owner, and I always try to tell people, like, there is, when you can just go in and do your job and go home, there's a lot of value that can be placed on that. And so if you can make that worthwhile for somebody and create a culture that's worthwhile for them and compensation that's worthwhile, that's how you can keep and retain really talented people in your spa. We have been lucky to be recognized nationally for our employee compensation and bonus program. I've actually won 2 national awards for it last year and this year. Very exciting. And I have won many, many awards. In fact, we have won 7 awards just this year for a lot of different things. But I am proud of that particular award because it's great to get awards saying you're the best at skincare, you're the best at massage, you're the best at all of these different things. But when somebody recognizes you for the effort that you put into trying to make sure that your staff is well taken care of, it does really feel good as a business owner, because it's not easy, and we're working with really tight margins, and we wish that we could just show our staff the numbers to be like, I am not taking half of your money, I promise you that. But being able to incentivize your staff and have a way for them to grow beyond, we have caps. There's only so many percents that we can give to our staff, right? And that's usually where people see the raise is going to come, is I want more percentage. So being able to create these bonus programs or different metrics within your salon to be able to reward people, I think is really key. And you want to check your local laws for the certification, training, reimbursement. Definitely, if you are thinking about that, or if that's something that you provide, I can talk to you a little bit more about that, because there is some subtleties and some gray areas. One of the big things that I wanted to talk about today too, because I struggle with this a lot as a business owner, and I hate to point my finger around the room, but there are some companies that have really high cost per service because they're super amazing technologies, they've got all these really great things. But you're looking at like $30 maybe to provide that service. As a business owner, if I'm providing commission-based wages to my staff, you cannot be taking things off the top. That is charging people for the cost of doing business. That would be similar to if you were working in an office and your boss was saying, I would like you to make me this nice presentation with this binder and all these tabs and all these things, and then you go make the presentation, and then you look at your paycheck and they charge you for the binder and the tabs and the paper. That's not that bad. So somehow in our industry, we have decided that we will do that because the cost of the product was just so much that if I were to take that $30 off of just my side, I would be rubbing 2 pennies together. But that's the sad reality of our industry. And you need to create your pricing structure and your commission structure to reflect that, rather than getting yourself into these big tangles where then you feel like you can't offer some of these more advanced services because the commission and the pay structure won't allow it. So definitely keep in mind when you are setting your prices that you are not going to be doing cost deductions before you do your commissions. You need to either adjust your commissions or adjust your pricing to try to absorb those product costs if they are too exorbitant for you. Most states, that is definitely a legal practice. We're talking treble damages again, and that means 3 times what you have taken from these people. So if one of your staff finds out, just imagine what happens there, because if one of your girls found out that you have been taking the cost of the product off of the top for even, let's say, a year, let's say 5 years, and then they share that with the other girls who've been with you for 5 years. That will likely be the end of your business. If you were to have to be put in a position where you would have to repay that money 3 times. I do know of some local businesses that were really, really heavy hitters, big names in the area, big reputations, 20-chair salons. I mean, big names that have made some tough mistakes that have cost them their business overnight. So it's definitely something to consider. And the art of letting go. Before you even think about having a conversation, make sure that you are on legal footing, because there are definitely some issues that can happen in the letting go process as well legally. At will versus contracts. So if your state, like Massachusetts, is an at-will employment state, you generally have the right to terminate an employee at any time for any reason, as long as it is not illegal. If you have a contract, you're going to need to honor what is in the contract. So if you've chosen to have booth renters, you're going to have contracts with them. And so if you're trying to terminate a booth renter, you really need to make sure that you are doing it in line with what you have put into your contract, or else that person is going to come right back with probably issues showing you that that was not part of your contract. The firing of people in the state of Massachusetts at will, I can say I have taken that option a couple times. It can feel really harsh because usually it's a very short conversation. And in most instances, and my lawyer will always say that a termination should take less than 60 seconds. There should really only be a few sentences. It's usually something along the lines of, very grateful for everything that you have brought to the table. Unfortunately, this is the end of our professional road, and I wish you nothing but the best in your future. And that is pretty much all that you need to say if you are terminating somebody at will. You can terminate people for cause. It's just that it gets a little bit more tricky because you really have to have a lot of documentation. You have to make sure if you're terminating somebody for a specific reason that you have brought that to their attention before, that you have written that there was a problem, that you've given them a chance to try to make it better, that you've given them at least an option to make it better. And there can be some disputes on that as well. You know, if it's not in writing, if it was just a verbal thing, pretty much everything should be in writing. But if the termination is due to performance issues or misconduct or policy violations, just make sure you have all of that in writing. In some states, you do need to issue the final paycheck immediately upon termination. So this is super important. There can be some disputes sometimes as to what is happening in the departure process. There can be explosive behavior in your face that you definitely thought was pudding, and then the person says, I was fired. And you are just absolutely shocked because you're like, well, I wasn't even there that day, so how would I have been able to hand you your paycheck? And not prepared for you to leave that day, so did not have your paycheck ready. So these are definitely gray areas because employee wage claims or any kind of lawsuits that employees will bring against you are almost always won by the staff member. It's almost impossible as the business owner. Everything in mostly in the state of Massachusetts is in favor of the employee. And it's very challenging to prove anything otherwise. So you do want to, if you are going to do a termination, you're going to want to issue the final paycheck. You're going to want to have that in the hand when you're doing your termination. You also are going to need to pay them any sick time, any vacation time. So if they are entitled to vacation time they haven't taken yet, it needs to be paid, and all of their sick time that they have accrued needs to be paid as well on their departure. That needs to be handed to them right away. You also would want to let them know that they are eligible for unemployment. If you want to actually provide for them a link so that they can make that even easier. Not a lot of us are needing to provide health insurance. We got lucky in our industry. There's like a little bit of a waiver for us. We don't necessarily have to provide it, but if you do, you would also need to give that staff member information on how they can continue their health insurance through COBRA benefits. So that would be your little packet that you would give to them upon termination. And I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the fact that, I do not consider myself to be, I'm not a lawyer. I didn't go to school to be a lawyer. I am not technically an HR representative. I am a business owner who has learned a lot in the process of doing things the hard way. So definitely listen to what I'm saying, but check your local laws. And if you have questions, I love to talk business. I usually do provide my expertise for free as well. I don't charge for coaching, I don't charge for mentoring, I just love to talk shop. And I have a ton of wealth of information spanning anything that you can think of with regard to business. And so I really do encourage any of you to follow me on social media if you'd like and reach out. I wrote a book, which is featured here on this next slide. I do have a couple in my little bag over here if there's anyone who wants to take home a hard copy, but it's available on Amazon. Some of the other chapters are going to include offer letters, job descriptions, employment terms, setting expectations before day one, policies and procedures manuals versus your employee handbook, because rules don't kill the vibe, lack of rules do. And the right way to grow your team, hiring for the business that you want, not the one that you're stuck in, handling difficult employees and tough conversations, keeping it real, respectful, and HR legal, photo taking, waivers, advertising rights, deceptive marketing, cancellation fees, handling gratuities, and more, because I also just got sued recently for using a photo on my Facebook page. That was not my photo to use. And yeah, those are interesting lessons. But that was a social media person that I had hired and paid to create my content. And she had made this choice without my knowledge. And I was the one who was to suffer the consequences of that. So those are just little things that you just don't really think would come and bite you in the bum, but they sometimes do. So they're good things to just know and remember, because I am a business owner. I do, I have learned a lot. I've got my 18 staff going, but I do have, I have an accountant, I have a bookkeeper, I have lawyers, HR reps that work for me, I have a marketing director, a director of business operations, I have an answering service, I have a laundry service, I have team leads, educators in each department. So I have a lot of advice coming in from every direction, and this is not something that is just easy coming right out of the gate. I have a lot of people on my team now that help me to make these decisions, help me to stand up here and be this amazing leader and have this business that I can be so proud of. And it is really fantastic to be able to have some of the freedom and flexibility that I have in my life. I know that my staff actually was just like, I think that you should keep your Instagram stories private, because there's just so many things that I do in my life. And I'm always harping on people about how much time off everybody's taking, but then they watch me and I'm like on a vacation every other month. But I've been on like 20 different yoga retreats. I'm an advocate for self-care and making sure that I too have a horse. I like to spend time out of my business. I want to retire early, like Stephanie, and have turkeys in the back there. And having staff and taking the time to make sure you have a business that you can count on, that's going to be there for you, that's not just going to blow up in flames, that's not going to result in all these lawsuits or headaches and troubles, to build staff, to create that legacy, to make something that I can watch my girls now buying their first cars and they're all going on their vacations and things like that. So there are some things that seem scary and that can be kind of fish out of water when you're thinking about hiring that first staff member. And of course, I just paint you like the worst picture possible, but it is so worth it. It is such a joy, and I think there's definitely people in this room, I'm sure, who have been thinking about it. You're watching that cancellation list grow, you're thinking, how can I scale? I've got this little room, maybe just one more girl in here, adding some complimentary services. And so I do encourage you, if you have been thinking about it, if you think that this is something that you should do, take the plunge. I started small and I've worked my way up, and it's been a wild ride, and it's been like just as fun as it's been crazy.